Hi there! Welcome to Simple or Not Kitchen. My name is Melissa Saynode and today we are making homemade focaccia. Homemade bread is one of my favorite things to eat, and I love homemade focaccia with homemade tomato soup. This recipe that we're following today is easy and it's delicious. And there's nothing like homemade bread coming out of your oven. To make this delicious bread, we're going to need about 4 cups of flour, we're going to need a little bit of salt, and about 2 teaspoons of yeast. That's about 1 packet if you're using the packets. You're also going to need 2 cups of warm liquid. I like to combine milk and water, but you could use just all water or all milk if you'd like. We're also going to need some dried herbs. I'm using a little bit of rosemary and oregano from my garden. We're going to start by proofing our yeast in some warm water and flour, but before we even get to that point, we're actually going to just read those directions on the back of the packet of yeast. It has the expiration date, and we're going to check the expiration date, make sure that our yeast isn't expired. It actually tells you right on the back of that packet to check the expiration date, and it's also telling us to make sure that our water is not too hot and not too cold, and that will help the yeast activate. To proof our yeast and make sure that it's alive, we're going to go ahead and combine some of the flour from our recipe with a little bit of the liquid from our recipe, making sure that the liquid is warm enough but not too hot. And then I'm going to take my yeast and I'm going to pour it right in there. Then I'm going to cover it and let it sit for just a few minutes, about 20 minutes. And when we take the cover off, if the yeast is active, it will be nice and bubbly. And then we're going to take that yeast mixture and we're going to combine it with the rest of our flour, the rest of our liquid, and our salt, as well as a little bit of olive oil. If you want to include that, you could leave out the olive oil. I just put in a splash. And you can certainly do this by hand, but I am using my stand mixer. It's one of my favorite ways to make bread, and it's probably what I use my stand mixer for the most, is for just kneading dough and mixing the doughs together. So I'm going to let the stand mixer do its thing. It's going to go for probably about a good 5 minutes here in the stand mixer. Then we are going to take that dough and we're going to transfer it to a bowl that we've greased with just a little bit of olive oil. We're going to cover it with plastic and we're going to cover it with a towel. And then we're going to need a little bit of patience. We are going to let this sit for at least 12 hours. You can let it sit for as long as 3 days. Of course, if you're using milk, you'll want to refrigerate it while you let it sit. But the secret to a nice focaccia is to just let it sit untouched for at least a day or two. So I'm going to let this sit overnight, and the next day you can see what it looks like. It's done exactly what it's supposed to do. It's nice and spongy, and it's ready for us to bake it. So I'm going to transfer this dough to a baking pan. I'm using just a standard baking sheet. I have lined it with some aluminum foil, and I've also greased it as well. And after I put it in the pan, I'm going to go ahead and just cover it back up for a little bit and let it sit for just a few minutes, just so that the dough gets nice and comfortable in that pan. Then it's time to bake up this yummy batch of deliciousness. But first, we're going to take some melted butter and a little bit of olive oil mixed with some of our herbs. I'm using rosemary, oregano, and a little bit of salt. And we're just going to brush that on top of our bread. Then we're going to bake it at 425 degrees for about 25 minutes to a half an hour. And oh my gosh, you guys, look at this deliciousness when it comes out of the oven. This is the perfect tasty bread to just gobble up on its own or eat it as toast. I'm eating mine with some homemade tomato bisque. Thank you so much for watching. You'll find more recipes, articles, and video at PennellCentral.com.